It's important to remember that there are times whenever we factor and set our zeros where we're not going to have a full trinomial. Cases like this. Here I have a linear term, the minus 8x, and a quadratic term, the x squared, but I don't have a constant on the end. In cases like this, it's important to look for what these two terms have in common. They both have at least one x. X squared is just x times x. And then this is obviously just 1x. So what can I pull out of both of these? Think of it as like the reverse of the distributive property. What can I pull out of both of those? They both have at least one x in them, so I can pull an x out. If I got rid of one of these x's, what would be left? Just a single x. If I got rid of the x here, what would be left? Just minus 8. Then I set this equal to 0. Once I've done that, I now know how to solve the rest of the problem. Even though I don't have two sets of parentheses to break up for the zero product property, I do have two things multiplied by each other equal to 0. So that tells me at least one of those equals 0. So I set them both equal to 0. The first one is easy now. It's x equals 0. The second one, x minus 8 equals 0. I still have to solve. Add the 8 across, and I get x equals 8. If I plug these back into the original problem, 0 squared is 0, minus 8 times 0, which is 0. That gives me 0. Exactly what I wanted. If I plug 8 in, 8 squared minus 8 times 8, 8 squared is 64. 8 times 8 is obviously also 64. 64 minus 64 is equal to 0. So those are both zeros of the function. So not too bad so far. Now we get to throw some word problems in. You're going to find when you eventually take physics, that when you do, you're going to find that this is a common physics equation. So we have any object that's thrown or launched into the air, such as a baseball, basketball, or soccer ball, is a projectile. The general function that approximates the height h in feet of a projectile on Earth after t seconds is given. So the negative 16t squared, that's the constant due to Earth's gravity. Earth's gravity is pulling it downward. That's why it's negative 16t squared. The initial vertical velocity, that's how high it's being kicked up, or how hard it's being kicked up in the upward direction. I guess that makes sense when I already said up. But it's how hard it's being kicked upwards, or what the velocity is as the ball were to leave someone's foot, or as a rocket was to be shot up into space. And then h naught, by the way, that's called v naught because it's at t equals 0. H naught is the original height. So if I'm kicking a ball from the ground upwards, then whenever I kick it, it was already on the ground. So because that was on the ground already, my H naught in that case would be 0. It's where it's at before I actually kick it, or shoot it, or throw it. If I'm shooting a basketball, my H naught's not going to be at 0. It's going to be at the height of my hand as I release the ball. A golf ball is hit from ground level with an initial vertical velocity of 80 feet per second. After how many seconds will the ball hit the ground? When I look at this one, my initial velocity is 80. So that goes in for v naught. So it's negative 16t squared plus 80t. And then where did this start? Started on the ground, so this would be plus 0. Where is it going to land? Well, if I'm hitting a golf ball, it's not going to fly up into space. It's going to land back on the ground. So now I can take my equation that I found, get rid of the 0 because it does nothing. Negative 16t squared plus 80t equals, where is it at the end? The ground. So if it hits the ground, that tells me that my height at the end is going to be 0. Now I can factor this out. What do these have in common? Well, there's no third term, so we don't have to factor it like we were doing yesterday. But there is 2 terms here. I can divide both of these by 8, so I can pull an 8 out. And there's also a t in both terms. I can pull a t out. If I divide negative 16 by 8, that leaves me with negative 2. If I had 2 t's and I took 1 out, that leaves me with 1 t. If I had 80 t, I took 8 out, that leaves me with 10 plus 10 and no t's. Anybody see a problem here? When I look at this now, what I see is the fact that I still have a 2 and a 10. That means that I could have divided both of these by 16 because they still have a common factor inside of here. So basically I can go one more step and divide both of these by, and I'll divide by negative 2. If I pull a negative 2 out in front, negative 2 times 8 gives me negative 16t. This now leaves a positive t. And then because I'm dividing by a negative, that's going to make this a negative 5. Now I can break these two up. Negative 16t equals 0. T minus 5 equals 0. And now I solve. Divide 0 by negative 16. That's just t equals 0. Add the 5 over to the other side. That's t equals 5. What does this tell us? T equals 0 says that before we kicked the ball was on the ground. So that makes sense, right? Or I'm sorry, it was a golf ball. Before we hit the ball, as bad of a golfer as I am, I usually do end up kicking a ball. But before we hit the ball's on the ground, so that's at 0 seconds. After we hit it, it flies through the air for 5 seconds and hits the ground again. That's what this 5 stands for. So the ball will be back on the ground in 5 seconds. Let's look at another one. A football is kicked from ground level with an initial vertical velocity of 48 feet per second. How long is the ball in the air? All right, so Pele's kicking this ball from ground level, which means that we're looking at our original formula again. H of t equals negative 16t squared plus 48t plus 0, because the ball is on the ground when it starts. Now I have negative 16t squared plus 48t. And we want to know when the ball is back on the ground or how long it's in the air. So we set it equal to 0. What can I pull out of both of these terms? I can pull a t out, and I can pull a negative 16 out. Even though this is plus, if I divide it by negative 16, it'll just make this turn into a negative. So I'm going to pull the negative 16 out in front. What's 48 divided by 16? Good. It's 4. So this is t, but it was a negative 16 that we divided by, minus 4 equals 0.
Mr. Graham, please report to the guidance counselor's secretary's office. Mr. Graham, please report to the guidance counselor's secretary's office. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So it's negative 16t equals 0, and then t minus 4 equals 0. Somebody must be fighting. Divide by negative 16, that gives me t equals 0. Again, the football was on the ground before Pele ever kicked it. Here, we add 4 to the other side. We get t equals 4. So after 4 seconds, the ball is back on the ground again. Ball's in the air for 4 seconds and then hits the ground. Okay, that is about it for this section. Please come on the Google Meet if you're struggling. It looks like we're going to have a quiz on Monday or Tuesday. I'm probably going to push it to Tuesday just so that we can get extra practice in and get some homework reviews in to make sure we're doing this right. All right, guys, I will talk to you later.